everybody suffers. And no matter how spiritual you become, no matter how enlightened you become, you don't get out of this human existence. And so right there, that's really the root of our interconnectedness. You were talking about Apple TV and all this, synergistic in the media, which one way of looking at that, right, is it's an externalization of something that is internal in us. You could even see it as it's consciousness trying to know itself by building this mechanism of interconnectivity out there. But the truth is we're connected by virtue of our shared humanity. And so I really love when people talk out of that, these are the terrible mistakes I made, and this is what I did to straighten my life out. Then I know that's like an authority I can trust.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Keynote Curators Podcast. I'm Seth Deckman, your Keynote Curator. Our guest today is Jack Hannibal. Jack, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Seth. It's really nice to be here.
Jack, I say this to all our guests, but this really has a different meaning for me. It is really nice for you to be here, to have you here, because we've known each other, for I think 15 years is when I first walked into one of your acting classes. And just to now be here and have you as a guest on my podcast is thrilling, a little bit nerve-wracking, but exciting. So thanks for doing this.
I'm really happy to be here. And I feel the same way. I think I said this to you. When you walked into that acting class, I just remember thinking there was just some familiarity, oh, I know this guy. And here it is all these years later, and I know this guy. It's cool.
Yeah. And we really do know each other. Our wives know each other. And I've met your dog, and we've shared some walks and strolled through the hills of Asheville, North Carolina. It's been really great to get reconnected. But Jack, I want to get right into the heart of the matter, or as they say in New England, the heart of the matter. You've done a lot of work in TV and film and theater. This is a really deep, profound question here. But if you had to be trapped in a movie or a TV show for a week, which would it be?
Wow. Ted Lasso.
Ted Lasso. Yeah. I don't know if you were out walking your dog or not, but the Super Bowl had a commercial which featured Lionel Messi, right? But Ted Lasso had made a cameo into the commercial. And I just couldn't help but think of all the convergence of, you've got Argentina, Latin America, Spain, where he played, I'm talking about Leo, Apple TV, Ted Lasso, and then a commercial for beer during the American Super Bowl. It's just like the convergence of everything. It was just made me chuckle on how everything is kind of so interconnected.
Yeah. Wow. You're watching with a critical eye. I love that.
I am. But why Ted Lasso? What is it about the Ted Lasso show that appeals to you?
I mean, it's the first thing that came to my mind. And I mean, one of the things that I loved about the show, and I think everybody loved about the show, is that he's like the holy fool, right? He's the innocent. And I think there's something, I know, we're living through some pretty bleak times. And just to see that character that's so grounded in kindness, forgiveness, simplicity, it was really refreshing.
Yeah, there is. I mean, you just said the word, the simplicity, but it doesn't mean that there's nothing there, because there was always some core virtue, whether it was kindness, forgiveness, acceptance, understanding, empathy. There's always something there amidst all of the nonsensical humor and the wordplay and the play on the cultures and everything. There was something that was disarming about how Ted Lasso was, but also there was some substance there,
Yeah. And also one thing that they did really wisely is they complicated him, right? Is that while he was this really generous, kind, loving guy, he also had a secret. He had the pain and the grief of his divorce and being left. And so you can see too how his way of being with everybody, this may not be the right way to say this, but there was almost a dishonesty to it, right? It was a coping strategy that enabled him to manage his own pain, right? He kept that off stage and he just took care of everybody else. And I don't really remember the story well enough. I don't know that they got into it, but I guarantee that played out in his marriage. It's hard, as lovely as Ted Lasso is, it'd be hard to be married to him because where are you, Ted?
Yeah.
Right. And, I don't know what they did with that or thought about that, but that's sort of the shadow side of what otherwise are some pretty wonderful characteristics.
Yeah, and I think that what is so relatable is that I can speak for myself, but there's always something that's being hidden or covered or kind of, something on top of something else. And, I think people can identify that with Ted. I'm on a first
Yeah.
name basis with him, by the way. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. Right. um, no, I'm actually really glad we're talking about this because as I was thinking about doing this, I got nervous because I was like, I don't want to sit here and talk as some authority on wherever this conversation goes. I mean, I used to say to my acting students, I'm exactly like you are. I mean, when I get a script, I get a script. I have to read it for the first time. I have to make decisions about what I'm going to do. I have to read it as carefully as I can. All the questions that I have to answer are the exact same questions you have to answer. The only difference between you and I is that I've been doing this for so long and I can share with you my process and my experience. I often not cringe, but like my back goes up a little bit when I hear podcasts and I hear people talking in this sort of third person way from this position of like sort of, unquestioning authority.
yeah.
One of the things that I know, acting teacher, psychotherapist, everybody suffers. And no matter how spiritual you become, no matter how enlightened you become, you don't get out of this human existence. And so, right there, that's really the root of our interconnectedness. You were talking about Apple TV and all this, synergistic in the media, which one way of looking at that, right, is it's an externalization of something that is internal in us. You could even see it as it's consciousness trying to know itself by building this mechanism of interconnectivity out there. But the truth is, we're connected by
Yeah.
virtue of our shared humanity. And so I really love when people talk out of that, like these are the terrible mistakes I made, and this is what I did to straighten my life out. Then I know that's like an authority I can trust.
Amen. I go through it myself on my podcast. I question, wonder out loud to myself internally, being an authority, speaking at people rather than with them or to them, or engaging a monologue versus a dialogue and letting the conversation, albeit have an intention, go where it takes itself. And so I know it's not technically a medical syndrome, imposter syndrome, or the inauthenticity of being human where we're hiding something, constantly pretending something out there. But I love how you said the consciousness knowing itself, like everything's externalized, but really there's a through line. And that's the second time I'm using that word, but there is this connectedness on a subconscious level or a non-external level that had me connect Leo Messi on the beach in Miami with Ted Lasso on the sideline and an American Super Bowl. And people are just wanting to have this meaningful connection. I'm making a big jump here, but the knowing of Ted as somebody who's grappling with what it is to be human and the suffering and the challenges while still going into what I would consider be a strong suit where he's pleasing, he's happy, he's cheerful, he's encouraging. It's kind of everything all at once. And I think that's what had the show be so successful and so attractive.
When there's an implication here, or there could be an implication here, that in order to be authentic, you have to get up in front of your audience, and open a vein and tell them about your unhappy childhood and all of that stuff. Obviously, that's not the case, and it's not always appropriate to bleed
Right.
in public. People can be squeamish. I think a way to think about this is like on a spectrum. you can have terrible things that have happened to you, and all of us do. Like, this is a fact. People hurl the word trauma around these days. Everything is traumatic, and there are really traumatic things that people endure and that have happened. But if we use just a lowercase t instead of big trauma, little trauma, everybody has it. Everybody has been experienced abandonment, rejection, inadequacy, self hatred. It's just these are kind of the greatest hits of this human incarnation, and those experiences are born out of relationship. Like if you think about something had to happen with another person circumstantially for you to feel these things. Now, then, how did you respond to that? Some people, because of, and there's no fault in this, right? There's no blame. It's just, what did you do? Some people, because the pain is so overwhelming and it can literally be, survival is at stake, they suppress it so intensely that it's outside of consciousness. They have no, I get clients all the time who tell me, I don't want to talk about my childhood. I had a great childhood. And I always say, like, I don't care what you think about your childhood, because the empirical evidence of the childhood you had is how you are showing up right now in your relationship. Like, and whether you put a value judgment that it was good or bad or happy or sad is really secondary to what you're actually doing. And we're going to look at that together. So you've got that, right? So you've got, somebody who's just completely, and that person can be wildly outgoing. They can be wildly driven and successful. Again, that can run the whole gamut. What happens though so again, that's one side of the spectrum. The other side of so let's say Ted Lasso might be a little bit more in the middle, where I'd put him a little bit over this way, where Ted is aware of struggle in his life, but he doesn't really integrate it, right? He doesn't, again, I may not be recalling all the episodes, but it's like, you don't see him in any kind of ongoing way, although he does, right? He starts with therapy finally, right?
He does.
Right. Is he starts to process what actually happened to him. What is the pain that he's carrying? And how do you then integrate that? So then if you go to the other end of the spectrum, you meet people, whether they have come through, great or small suffering, and it's all, of course, relative. Another thing we like to say to ourselves, right, is, oh, this is a first world problem. What suffering do I have? What right do I have to feel bad about anything when you look at what's going on in the Middle East?
Like there's a comparative scorecard or something.
Yeah. And unless you're being shot at, you don't have a right to pain. And that doesn't help anything. That just sets up a hostile relationship to yourself where you're becoming intolerant of your own experience. The other side of the spectrum is when you have really done that work, you don't necessarily have to talk about it with everyone, but the sense of integration is something that you carry in your presence, right? Is that you're just at ease. There's an emotional equanimity, kind of, you're not running from anything. Whenever I meet people this was actually one of the questions I got into when I was teaching acting. This is a cool story. So I was years into teaching by this point, and and I had people who ran the gamut from kids at UCLA who were just trying to stay in the country, getting their education green card, right? And then I had people who were pursuing this professionally, and those people were by and large typically very well educated, incredibly self-aware, highly disciplined, and highly driven. And one of the things that I kept noticing is that in highly driven people, they're often incredibly self-critical in a way that would drive themselves insane. They were never satisfied. And there was it was just this kind of understanding, like, if you want to be at the top of your game, this is what it takes. Well, years ago, I did a play in New York, an off-Broadway play, a terrible play, with the singer-songwriter Carole King. Did I ever tell you this story?
No, but I heard just a complete deviation, and I'm very into this. When the Beatles landed in America, the first person they wanted to meet was Carole King.
Oh,
She was
That
a
makes
single
sense.
mother. She was a single mother living in New Jersey at the time. So you're in this play.
But no, I got to go back. So I get the audition for this play, and my agent says it's Carole King, and I
Whoa.
said, "Who is that?" And he goes, "Do your sisters have the album Tapestry?" And I said, "I don't know." And he was like, "I don't want to talk to you. Go take the audition." So I knew she was a big deal, a big
Right.
music deal, but I literally had no idea who she
Mm.
was. The role was to play a punk rocker. I look like this, right? But I'm 21 or 22 or whatever I was, right? Like, this is New York City. Like, they have real punks,
Right.
like, you don't cast this to play that. You just go get that.
Right. It just,
I
you walk out a half a block and you have a half a dozen to choose
Right.
from.
You want that guy on heroin or not on heroin? Like, what do you want? You look for, I'm so like, it's to play a punk rocker. I'm like, I'm not that guy. I'm going to play tennis with a buddy of mine. So I am literally dressed in tennis whites and I have a knapsack with a tennis racket in it. And I walk into this audition and it's a room full of, safety pin pierced spiked hair punks. And I'm like, yeah, that's who you want. So I go in, I meet this very lovely woman. We have this nice little chat. This other guy, Paul Hip, was a wonderful musician, played Buddy Holly on Broadway. He's there, and the script is terrible. So I just start ad libbing. It seems a car accident. Me and Paul come upon this car wreck. He and Carol start to have this kind of fall in love relationship, and I'm just the funny sidekick. So I'm ad libbing left and right just because the text is awful, and I don't care. Long story short, get the job. So we're in rehearsal, and when we're in, or actually, I think we had maybe started to run, and Carol gets inducted into the Music Hall of Fame for having penned more number one, more singles that had gone gold to number one, gone gold than any artist in the history of recorded music, more than the Beatles,
Yeah.
more than Elvis, more than Beethoven. And it's dawning on me who this woman is. And she's just lovely. And, we have this wonderful time, get to know each other. And it was years later when I was teaching that my experience with her came back to me, because here was a woman who operated at the very highest level in this field, and everything about her exuded joy. There was no, she
Yeah.
worked hard. Of course she did, but there was no grind about her.
Yeah.
And I started to wonder, is it possible to teach at that level with that level of excellence as the expectation, but from a place of orientation that actually brings the student to a sense of loving what they're doing? Yeah, I want to be really good at it, but I don't want to ground myself into the dirt in order to get there. And that caused in me a tectonic plate shift in how I taught
Yeah.
and kind of what I tried to evoke in students. And what was really interesting is the students pushed back on it, because as a young teacher, I taught with a lot of passion. I really cared, and I loved it. But I had this tremendous intensity that I brought to what I was doing. But I had to then ask myself, is my intensity serving that student? On
Yeah.
one level, yeah, they could feel me advocating for them. But on another level, it was taking up too much room. I had more power than they did, and I needed them to have power. So I started to try to practice teaching from a place of more dispassion. And just sort of, and I did more, it was more of an interview, a Socratic interview. How do you feel like you did? Were you successful in terms of what the character wanted? What worked, what didn't work? It wasn't me holding forth on what good acting means. It was me eliciting it from you. And the quieter that I got, the more nervous and insecure my students got. So we would do this kept happening. We would do this, back and forth. They would sit down, another scene would get up, eventually we'd take a break, and inevitably somebody would come back and say, "What did you really think?" They wanted me to give them the stamp. Was I good or was I bad? And I was like,
Right.
homie, don't play
The
that.
more conventional view.
And it was the same thing like when a student didn't do their work, like when they would come to class and they were unprepared. In the beginning, when I was a young teacher, I'd be so insulted. How dare you? Because that's how my teachers were. I mean, you in New York, man, like you didn't go to class. If you weren't ready to work, you didn't go to class.
Right.
And God knows you didn't get up because they would smell you, they would sniff it out, and you would be eviscerated for it. But they were a World War II generation, That's what they did. It was punitive. So I said to them, when somebody would come in, I'd say, listen, we're in Los Angeles, right? And it's your dream to be an actor. That's why you're here, right? You go anywhere in the world and tell people you're an actor, or you will inevitably hear somebody will say to you, oh, I've always wanted to do that. Or maybe they did it in a local theater, or I remember doing a play in college or high school, and everybody's got that longing. But you are the 0.0001% who said, I'm actually going to do this with my life. You then packed your bags from wherever you lived, said goodbye to everybody, flew to Los Angeles, and then you lived that reality. You had to find a place to live. You had to get a car. You had to find a way to support yourself, all the basics, just so that you then could be available to do the thing that you say you love to do. You got into my acting class, you're set to do it, and you didn't do it. So tell me, what did you do this week?
Right. What did you do instead of this?
You instead.
Yeah.
And what do you take from that? And that was really powerful, right? Because then people would start to recognize all the obstacles, the self-created obstacles that they were creating to put in the way of doing the thing that they wanted to do.
Yeah. I guess correct me here where I'm wrong, or the few areas where I could be right. But if what they're doing instead of what they said that they were committed to, not only that, what were you doing, but what did you tell yourself, which I guess would be that obstacle or that self-limiting obstacle. And that's access to something to be unconcealed, if you will, to see how we put stuff in our way.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. We all talk about, we all want love. We all want to be known. We all want, we want to have a spiritual experience, some of us, But actually, when you find out what those things cost and what that does to your psyche to actually have the thing, I mean, this gets a little esoteric, but it's like when you have a dream to be something, it's exactly that. It's a dream and it lives out there. And having a dream versus living the dream are two different realities.
Yeah.
And in order to live, you got to let the dream go. And that's it can be a very vulnerable making, exposing experience, because now you're the guy or the gal, whatever. This is a cool story. When I was in New York, one of my buddies was this guy named Vinny Caro. He's a we've lost touch, but at the time, he was an extremely sought after studio engineer because he was working at RCA. And apparently, Vinny's ear, he was this tough looking dude, just this somber little face, and he was just really quiet. But what musicians loved about Vinny is that he could get your guitar in the studio to sound like he was playing it right in front of you, or you were playing it right in front of him. So his ears were so sharp that his ability to kind of tune a room were legendary. And this one day he invited me to RCA, and he had all these different groups playing in different rooms. And he walked me from floor to floor as he just went in and he just checked on how the sessions were going. In one room was David Byrne, and he was going through his Latin phase.
Sure.
And he had
Tropicalia.
Right. He had this huge band, and they were burning. Like it was just burning.
They were burning down the house.
Burning down the house. They go to another floor. It was Wynton Marsalis and a jazz trio. And it's quiet and it's beautiful.
Right. They're just working with some kindling.
Yes, yes, just right. And oh God, the third was Harry Connick Jr. Big, brassy, New Orleans. I mean, it was just like three like concerts, like back to back. Vinny gets a Coke. We're sitting out in the hall. It's dead quiet. Vinny didn't talk a lot. And he goes, you know what the difference is between the people who are doing it and the people who aren't doing it? I said, what? He said, the people who are doing it are doing it. It's just like,
right. And end of story.
Yeah, like what more do you need?
Yeah. You talk about the dream, living the dream is just that, and then living the dream. And it's like, Jack, people get touched, they get moved, and they get inspired. And they say that whatever it is, it's an experience, it's an accomplishment, it's pure possibility. And then reality sets in where you are in the moment of your life and what you imagine, not even that but what you imagine it's going to take to get from where you are and grasp, reach, strive towards what's possible. Who knows if you're going to get there or not? But that distance and the work and the cost that it takes to get there, resignation can set in right away. And that being moved and that being inspired and being touched by what's possible versus what it takes to really start living it. That's the difference, I think, what you're talking about.
Yes. And I'm with you, because that's it, right? That's part of the journey is you have got to inventory when you are not where you want to be. You have got to honestly assess, where you are and what's the next right step. Like, where do you need work? What needs to happen next if you're going to move closer to where you want to go? But just as you were saying that, I kind of want to flip it on its head, because there's another way to think about this. And this comes home to my story. So I'm on Broadway when I'm 21. I've done a bunch of TV commercials. I've done several like very high profile off-Broadway plays. I come to Los Angeles. I'm here about 2 years, just grunting it out. But now I'm starting to get breaks and I'm starting to work on some TV shows. I'm doing more commercials. I got a nice apartment. I'm dating someone, like everything was going the way it was supposed to go. And this one morning I had a panic attack, seemingly out of the blue, that I didn't know where this was coming from. I thought I was
seemingly, that's a key word there.
Yes. Yeah. Because clearly what I came to realize is that I had been normalizing a level of stress and anxiety. That was just the water I swim in. I didn't know.
The grind that you referred to.
It was the grind. It was also just, there's so many variables to what that all was. In that moment, even though if you charted my professional career, on paper, kind of the shorthand I just gave, it was all wonderful and it was ascending,
Sure.
It was like, but when that moment happened, this is a perfect, like sort of Ted Lasso moment of kind of where the conversation started. I had to turn and face something in myself and I had been in therapy. Like I knew the story of my childhood. I knew things that had happened, but there was clearly something in me that I had not accessed that needed attention. And because I'm the person I am, whatever, I decided to put everything about my life on the cutting block. That I was like, I don't care what I have to change. The bottom line was this. This was the same thing that happened to me. I'm 21. I'm on Broadway. It was opening night. It's a sea of black tie. It was in evening gowns. It was the most Shakespeare's Macbeth, Glenda Jackson, Christopher Plummer. It was the most highly anticipated show coming into New York. All kinds of doors were opening for me. And on opening night, I could just cry. I just remember this feeling. It was like my stomach. Because what I was trying to get by being an actor and was now achieving at the ripe old age of 21 didn't move the needle of my interiority one click. And the truth is that drive that I had, that it was coming out of a very unhappy place.
Mm.
It lost that love. I had lost that joy. And that carried, the more successful I got, the more intense that kind of separation from that early love of acting and pretend that drew me to the thing in the first place, the further I got away from that.
Yeah.
And that panic attack stopped me. And when I put everything on the cutting block, on the butcher's block, what I recognized over time, and I had to admit, and this was so hard for me to get because I had been so identified with being an actor. I mean, I turned professional when I was 16.
Yeah.
I did commercials when I was 9. It was like I knew in the second grade that this is what I was going to do. The truth of the matter is, I hated the life of the actor. And I was like, Cinderella's stepsister trying to jam my foot into a shoe that didn't fit. That was a total crisis of identity. Because again, my whole life I had thought of myself as this guy who does this thing.
Right.
And
And
so it
then,
took a long time to get like, yeah, you can do this thing, but you're not that guy.
yeah.
And so, back to this point of like, again, all of these podcasts are about how do you push through? What's the hack? How do you get to the next level? And I'm at a place where I'm like, you know what? Sometimes, well, first of all, what do you want? What I knew, what I came to understand, that what I wanted deeply in my life was I wanted happiness. I wanted a life that I felt had integrity and that I felt respectful of myself, that I felt like I was doing something worthwhile. And I didn't give a shit if nobody knew about it. Like I didn't need to be known.
That's a real state shift from pre-chopping block.
That's right. Quick story again, like I had a girlfriend at the time who was quite successful, quite. And we were fighting. Partly it was all of this. Like I hated her social life. I
Yeah.
hated Hollywood parties. It's all like you're not hanging out. It's work. It's positioning. It's
Yeah.
not my thing. And when I finally realized, we had this kind of breakthrough moment, I was like, oh, you're not interested in being happy. That's not your drive.
Yeah.
You are a really successful businesswoman, and that's what you want. And she kind of went, yeah.
Yeah.
And like, we're two different animals.
Yeah. And the context there is more transactional. And albeit if she's aware enough to say yes and own it, fantastic. But that went on the chopping block, I imagine.
We said goodbye.
One way
Yeah.
street to the chopping block. Jack, before I forget, there was something that you said that really struck me, and it had to do with Carole King and the grind and the intensity of people who are elite performers. And I'm not talking about acting necessarily, just in whatever they do, but that there's always something, and these are not your words, but dial me in here. There's something missing, or they're living in the gap, or it can always be better, or there's something that's not working as well as it could be, albeit there's an enormous amount of evidence and proof that you're successful, or you've accomplished something, or you have accolades or acknowledgement and recognition. Going back to Carole King, and what you saw there, you used the word equanimity, that I don't want to put words in your mouth, that balance, or there was a harmony or a coherence. I imagine a song being written. It wasn't just, hey, let's fabricate a song and one time through and it's a draft and let's record it and great, it's a hit and I'm going to get recognized as, the most prolific gold record, creator in the world. What do you have to say about the gap exists, right? You're where you want to be, and then you're
Yeah.
where you
Let me say it
would
this
like
way.
to. Okay.
Yeah. It's a great question. And I think we're talking about two things here. One is one's orientation to the task, and then it's the
Okay.
task itself, right? We now know neurobiologically that we I was just listening, there's an Andrew Huberman podcast about this where he's talking a lot about this recently about, we used to think dopamine was tied to pleasure, right? That you get the trophy, you get the award, you sell the song, you get the promotion, and then you get the endorphin, right? It's not. It's about pursuit. That's the
Mm.
harder the thing is to do, the more the endorphin flows. So it's not about not doing the hard thing. In fact, Carol's a great example of this because once you write a song, it's like we used to say, like, you're only as good as your last job. And when that job is over, you are unemployed again, right? And it's like, so when you write a song, you write this wonderful song and it's a great hit and it's success. The world is chock full of one hit wonders. Because now
Although Beethoven's Fifth was a pretty good one.
it was all right. That kid he had potential, that guy.
I think he might catch on.
Right. Somebody writes a first novel. You listen to writers talk about trying to write their second novel. It is
J.D. Salinger.
Right? You can't, so you can get into this. So you got to do it again. So the difficulty of the thing, you actually want to what I'm talking about is your attitude going into the difficult thing, right? Carol does the difficult thing. She goes into the gap. She faces the blank piece of sheet music over and over again. It's terrifying. Meryl Streep said every time she gets a script, her first thought is, oh my God, I can't do this.
Yeah.
I don't know how to do this every time. But then it starts.
Yeah.
The question, so you actually want to cultivate that kind of challenge in your life, whether great or small, right? Whether it's, public facing or just something very personal. Difficulty is deeply engaging. The harder question is, but where are you coming from when you engage with it? Are you coming out of, I suck and I need to do this thing, so when I get that thing or I'm able to do that thing, then I'll be okay? Is it enough money? Is it enough prestige, power, position, whatever? That's fool's gold. That's chasing a dream that will never. Or can you be content now and driven, joyfully driven?
Yeah.
That,
and even as I relate to that, it's almost like I'm trying to conventionalize it. Is it possible? How do you thread the needle? Like I'm structuring it inside of, like there's a way to do it, which is more of the grind.
That's right.
How are you driven, but have that equanimity? How do you have that harmony and that balance, but still go into the gap? And I can tell you, listening to you, I know, I have the minimal self-awareness to be like, when something comes across me, whether it's outward facing or very personal, if it occurs as a problem, that's how I'm relating to it as. That's why it's occurring that way, as opposed to an opportunity or a blank space to go in and create what I want with it.
So now you're tipping into what for me is meditation, right? Is the trap in what you just said is the self-helpness of that attitude, right? Which is, let me say it this way, a problem presents itself in my life and my interiority goes, shit, or I feel scared.
God, not again. Or,
here we go again, all of that. And then I deny that experience by coming up into my self-help brain. And I go, hey, man, every problem's just an opportunity in disguise. And let's have an upbeat. Do you know what I mean? So I'm like, denying the felt sense, where I think you can sort of do both. I think self-talk like that is actually really helpful, but don't do it at the expense of what you really feel like. Let those feelings be here too, right? Here's this problem, and this is what I'm feeling in response. And these feelings, they're not personal to me. They're just what's arising by virtue of all these causes and conditions and this habit mind of mine responding to a certain stimulus. when I can allow those shitty feelings to be here and just make space for them, I'm not setting up an adversarial. I may not like them. They may be indeed painful, unpleasant, not what I want. But just so long as I'm not shoving them away or needing them to be anything else, I don't identify with them. And they can be here. I can feel them. I can go into, the despair, whatever it is that's coming up around this problem. Let them have their moment.
Yeah.
And then decide what's the next right move. Do I want to just go to bed and give up on the world? Or do I want to see what comes of this? If I do this next thing, what does that elicit? Right?
Yeah. It's interesting because it's like, let it have its space, let it percolate, let it have its moment instead of immediately. You've used the word a couple of times, respond. And I often try to watch myself and I feel like I'm just a manufacturer of reactions, where I'm just like, I look human and I'm bones and flesh, but I just feel like I'm just, this reactive machine. In the line of what you were just sharing, I think I'd love to get your, I don't know if it's a take or your thoughts or just dialogue a little bit about, there's a moment where something can get revealed. It's revelatory, it's eye-opening, and it can have an endorphin to it even. Like, oh my God, I never knew that. I never saw that. I never was aware of that. But then that in and of itself becomes the thing where the insight is almost the end. Like you become an insight junkie. And you can have all these things that you unconceal and you discover. But then the question is, and I know that, I don't know that I know, but, one way that I often do it is, okay, something's been revealed. And then what do I do? Well, something needs to be done. And I've run into a lot in my work where people are junkies to what's been distinguished and opened up, but then there's no action around it. And I don't even necessarily know that that's the right thing is action. So thoughts?
I love all of that. So let me take this in sequence. The first thing you said, right, and I love that, right, is like, I'm just a reactive monkey. I just like, we all think like we're rational. No, we're not, right? Let me diverge a little bit here. This is brain science. I work a lot of this with my couple clients, right? Couples come in and they're trapped in a pattern. He starts to talk about something and she rolls her eyes. As soon as he starts to talk, she rolls her eyes. And I'm making this heteronormative. This is just human.
Sure.
But sake of illustration, her. So he starts to talk about something. She rolls her eyes and he immediately reacts. What? Okay, forget it. And he shuts down. He shuts down and she escalates. And I go, okay, so what is this? What this is our brains are predictive organisms, right? We operate actually out of memory. We think we're all in the present. No, we're not. Just notice next time you're behind the wheel of a car or your golf cart, these little micro moves that you make as you're driving.
Yeah.
Like you're not doing that, but something is. What is doing that? Your automatic reactive brain. How is it doing that? Go back to when you first learned how to drive. Remember how intense that was? All systems are lit up, right? And you're learning this new thing. And what your brain is literally doing is taking a trillion snapshot of every permutation of this thing called driving. And the moment it got that and you learned it, it goes from your cerebral cortex thinking, executive function brain to the automatic brain. Because learning something new like that is intensely energy draining. So it goes to the automatic brain to where now you can drive and the last thing you're thinking about is driving. That's incredible. Your brain is predicting what's going to happen next, right? So what happens is, so those become habitual patterns and they're the same things that get established in relationships. That wife in the scenario I just gave, her brain has heard what? His tone of voice, this angle of thought, The way his
Phrases.
body shifted, everything about what he just did, her brain says, well, I've seen that 10,000 times. And she goes, yeah, tell me when it's over. And likewise, his brain has seen that. And that actually becomes their reaction. So by the time people come in to see me, all couples have problems, but they can't get to their problems to solve them because this reactive pattern is so intense. So, what you're describing, we all do, which is something happens and our brain evolutionarily has what we call a rapid appraisal of it. We react immediately, and usually we skew to the negative. It's in our interest to think of whatever's about to happen as bad or negative, because that's going to make us take protective action
Sure.
that will, let the species survive. So that there's a great saying in the 12 steps programs, you're not responsible for the first thought, but you are responsible for the second thought, right? So if you're an alcoholic, you are going to have a thought probably like, it'd be great right now.
Yeah,
A
let's
nice
crack
coffee.
one open.
Yeah, right. That's going to happen. What you do next is what matters. So you do the rapid appraisal, and then by that time, usually the cognitive mind has had time to come online and can actually think and make a skillful decision, right? When you think of panic, I always use this example. A buddy of mine was in college and many years ago, and on the fourth floor there was a dorm fire. Everybody got out of the building except for one guy, and he was cornered in his room, billowing smoke, and he couldn't breathe. And in his panic, he jumped out of the window and broke both of his legs.
Oy.
Come to find out, he was an avid mountain climber, and under his bed were all his gear. He had the ropes and he had the knowledge of how to safely rappel down the side of the building. But when his fear got so intense, that part of his mind went completely offline, and the animal part of himself said, get to safety, and he jumped. And we all experience that. That's literally what happens in problematic couples. They don't experience it like that. They just think each other's being a jerk. But actually, what they're doing is they are frightening each other in these existential places that are turning them into these kind of warring animals. And so my job is to intervene in that, calm them down from that, and then be able to get them to interact in a new way. Where did you go after that? I wanted to come back to that second thing you said.
I'm so intently listening that my mind went somewhere, and maybe we'll come back, because when you had that moment where you realized this woman you were dating in Los Angeles, as my cousins from England call it, Los Angeles, the honesty and the courage that it took to say, oh, okay, this is your business and you're not interested in, this other thing that is appealing to me. And she said, yes. One might say it took courage for you to take that inventory and then act on it. I don't know. This is just a random question. This is just a random question, but I always felt that the courage was something acquired after the act. It's not like I'm going to summon up the courage and break up with this, woman that I'm in a relationship with or whatever. I think the courage is something that populates your body afterwards, but I don't know.
Yeah, I love that actually, and make it seem like, we're in the middle of this fight and I had this insight and I was like, oh, the relationship is over, and, go in peace. I love you,
Right.
I wish you well. And I don't think it ended like that.
Yeah.
Right. And I like what you said, that oftentimes the insight comes after. And this brings us back to what you were talking about, people who are
the insight junkie idea, the revealing. Yeah. Sorry.
Insight is the booby prize to therapy, is what I say. You are not coming to me for more information about yourself. Everybody knows everything already. What you are looking to have happen is what we call a corrective emotional experience. You want to leave my office and be different out in the world. That is the objective measure that I use to know if the way that I'm relating to you in session has any merit whatsoever. Does it mean that we don't employ insight? No, of course we do. When like a couple will, go away, for example, let's say they've learned something new. They've learned how to stop what we call the negative cycle. They don't know how to fix it yet, but they were able to stop it. So they'll come into me and they'll say, oh my God, we started to get into a fight. And we just both looked at each other and said, we're in the cycle, right? I will then take time with them to process that, because the insights that they glean are really important, but they are also articulating a changed experience that they've had. Because literally what they are articulating is that we went into our deadly pattern, and we've got enough experience having worked with you, Jack, that on our own, we were able to break this habit pattern, tolerate the emotions that came up, and reach for each other in a way that was successful.
Yeah.
It's really important that they be given the time to integrate and consolidate and integrate that experience. So there is a cerebral level to this. But when it's out of balance, like you're saying, that becomes an insight junkie. I just want the new thing, or chasing the new.
And then I can go talk about it and say, "Oh my God, I noticed this," or whatever. But in the example you just gave with the couple, the intervention say, "Whoa, we're in the middle of the cycle," and then to just stop and not know what to do. Not that there's anything to do. Not that you're telling them there's anything to do. Just stop. The discomfort is also very visceral.
And recognizing you are growing your tolerance for these intolerable emotions, because that's actually, in fact, the next stage of therapy. Once the couple is de-escalated, I turn to each of them individually, and this happens over a series of sessions, and we go into, so what is exactly coming online for you? And not in a cerebral way, in a felt, I actually want to elicit those emotions and bring them into the room, and then help the partner. Because I'm the therapist, I can hold those emotions. So you're now doing something with me that is existentially terrifying, but I'm holding you in a way that is making you feel safe,
Yeah.
right? Which is making it possible. And then I'm turning you and I'm helping your partner become the container for you. So instead of protecting each other in our relationship, protecting ourselves from each other, we turn and we're now each other's greatest refuge, our greatest
Yeah.
source of safety.
It makes me think of the exercises we did in your class where you just are with the other actor sitting there, no, just in connecting, and that there's refuge or
Yes.
whatever comes up. But that muscle, that ability to be with and then notice what's going on in your mind, it's just fascinating.
Profound. Yeah. I mean, language is the last thing that happens, right? So when you're in the room, it's a little harder on the computer. You can do it. But when you're in the room with somebody, a partner, anybody, or just, a scene partner, and you just hold eye contact, there's a way of doing it that's a little defensive. You're looking, but you're not really seeing or allowing yourself to be
Right.
seen. So encourage, soften your gaze and just allow the music to go back and forth. And there is this unspoken conversation that goes on back and forth. And if you remember, I would put two people up in the front of the room to do it. And then I would ask the audience, the people watching, like, what are you seeing? And you
Yeah.
could tell that it was a real living back and forth. Was it a love scene? Was it brother and sister? Was it, just meeting? We could hang a narrative on top of that, because the living connection is what was there. And it is incredibly evocative in both ourself and the person that we're doing with, because there's no impediment, there's no screen. There's
Yeah.
just two souls looking at each other.
And impediments can be the words, which can be such a trigger, right? Oh, you chose that word, or what does that mean for you? Or
Yeah.
you're not, it's just really interesting. Jack, we've kind of come to the end here. I think we've left a lot on the table to revisit down the road and continue the conversation. This has been truly fascinating for me. I love, whether we're on a podcast or doing it in person or visiting up in Asheville or anywhere in the States, Los Angeles, in your classroom. It's just always enriching. We have one little thing that we do at the end here before we say goodbye. It's in the spirit of 20 questions, but it's not 20 questions. It's a little bit of, I don't know if it's hot seat, but it's kind of rapid fire word association. Are you ready?
Sure, lay it on me.
Okay. What's something about you that we wouldn't know by reading your CV, your resume, or your work history?
Something about me that you wouldn't know.
You're lactose intolerant.
I cry really easily.
Mm, mm,
And that is an acquired skill.
yeah,
I didn't always do that.
yeah. I think we're kindred spirits in that sense. All righty, a little bit more whimsical here. Ice
You're
cream.
right. Cleaned it up.
Chocolate. I'm running away from that feeling,
Yeah.
right?
Can we put that down?
Chocolate or vanilla?
Chocolate.
Chocolate. Pizza, traditional straight up cheese or toppings?
Toppings. Did I get
What's your
that wrong?
fastest or favorite way to reduce stress?
Oh, meditation.
Social media, friend or foe?
Oh.
What's the last book you read?
Demon Copperhead, Gilead by Robinson. No, Demon Copperhead. And now I'm reading In Love with the World, which is about a Tibetan Buddhist monk who leaves his monasteries. He overseas, he's like 36, and he walks out of his monasteries and he does a 3-year solo retreat living homeless on the streets. I don't
Wow.
actually recommend it if somebody's brand new to Buddhism. Like it's a little, it's pretty high level, but
Right.
I'm just halfway through it. It's beautiful.
Wow. It sounds like a Buddhist walkabout, if you
It's
will.
exactly right. Yeah, and it's part of their tradition. They do it.
What are you streaming, watching, last film you saw?
The last film that I saw was Treasure of the Sierra Madre. I
Mm.
rented that about a month ago, and I've been on a no TV diet for the last. I watch the Super Bowl, and I watch 1 hour of news a week. That's it.
All right, we're going to finish on this one last commentary. Well, two, but I wanted to ask you when you are working with couples and there's that, you take on these emotions and you didn't use the word vehicle, but they're the vessel or they're looking to connect with each other. I'm going to go in a really roundabout way here, and you're so generous in your listening. So, I watched the documentary last night with my wife, making of We Are the World. Lionel Richie, Michael Jackson, Quincy Jones, Stevie Wonder, and the entire host of stars. They recorded it the night of the American Music Awards because everybody logistically was in Los Angeles, and they went till 7 a.m. Kenny Loggins, Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings. So think of yourself as a writer, a performer, a director, a producer, an actor, and there's Bob Dylan. And he's visibly a fish out of water. Dionne Warwick, Cyndi Lauper, who's nothing but just one huge voice wrapped inside of body and bones. Stevie Wonder, who's mimicking Bruce Springsteen, and Al Jarreau, and on and on. And how you now are you recalling the song? We're talking 3 or 4 words that Tina Turner did in a verse, and then passing it on to Willie Nelson or Huey Lewis, and how the arrangement was needed. So it's Bob Dylan's turn. Iconic voice, iconic poet, performer, generation maker, right? Like holding the space of a whole paradigm of musicians and music. And he is not able to deliver. And Quincy Jones comes in, approaches him, and you could just, even on my couch, on my TV, you could see the disarming and the love and the empathy and the safeness that he created. And Dylan was actually singing the wrong line. And nobody, not that they dare say anything, but he was so in his own head, he didn't even realize he was singing the wrong line. And Quincy said something to the effect of like, That is really cool. Would you, I'm paraphrasing, would you mind continuing it on to this part here? I think if we carried it through, and then he said, do you mind if Stevie plays it? Bob was like, yeah, that would be great, you know? And it was just this masterful masterclass in the talent was there. There was so much in the way and on top of it. And all he had to do was get it out. I don't know why being in this conversation with you right now, it made me think of that. I mean, I always think of you and Quincy Jones almost as kindred brothers. You're
Thank you.
almost twins. You can just tell, right? Just kind of round that off in the work that you do, your experience, you know, just round it off for me. What could
Well,
you
I
distill
mean,
and distinguish it better than I did?
no, I mean, I can't wait to watch that. I can't believe that they got that on tape. I would just love to see a moment like that. What it brought up for me is the vulnerability of performing. You know,
Mm,
none of those people are those people. You know what I mean? You're not Bono. And he's not Bob Dylan. I forget his, given name. You're just some schmuck that stumbled into that. We're all that person. And I don't know, performance, everyone's got a podcast. Everyone's, performing. There's a thing I talk about in therapy. I'm going to say this in a way, I don't mean this to sound sexist. Women tend to be more verbal than men. It just skews that way. I don't know what, the data says, but they tend to be more verbal. And so they have a facility with emotional language. But what women often think mistakenly is that they're in touch with their feelings. They're not. None of us are. What I say is that, people are really good at talking about their feelings. They're really bad at having them.
mm,
So
yeah,
sometimes a wife will say, or a woman will say to her partner, I'm really sad, or that really hurt my feelings. And you can see by the way I said that, there's no sadness here and there's no hurt here. There's anger and there's defensiveness. Doesn't mean that those emotions aren't in there, but that's not what's presenting.
yeah,
And I call that a defended reach. She's actually reaching because she wants you to know that she's sad, or she wants you to know that she's hurt, and she wants to be cared for there. I could easily flip this and say this from the guy's point of view. That's what we are seeking, somebody to come into my experience. But what we don't see is that we're all reaching from this defended place. This is part of the
yeah,
reason why I don't, one of the things you see in social media, I'm going to go too far off on this. Let me kind of land this plane. It's just really beautiful to see a moment, somebody as iconic as Dylan being so undone, we are imagining because of the company that he's in. It's so beautiful, right? And Quincy's skillfulness is they didn't need to have a conceptual conversation about what was happening, right? Would not be helpful if he came in and said, wow, Bob, you're really kind of freaking out. You're really scared right now. He could go that way, but that's drawing attention to the problem. And what Quincy did so skillfully, right, is he just redirected his attention from himself to the solution.
yeah,
There's nothing wrong here. Just continue the line, and we're going to have Stevie accompany you.
yeah.
Bob's
And
okay, that I can do.
yeah, I would just assert that, the commitment was there. The fact that he was struggling and still doing it, the commitment was there. He wanted to, he was in the game. It was just like he needed just the dial, some pebble in the shoe pulled out. It was just such a beautiful moment.
Yeah,
Um,
I really can't wait to see that because when I do the presentation training, I talk so much about stage fright because that's everybody's biggest enemy. Stage fright is chronic self-consciousness. You're just glued on yourself and your system freezes.
yeah,
And for somebody of Bob Dylan's stature, for that to happen is just so humanizing.
yeah.
All right.
Yeah, no, incredible. And then the enthusiasm and the pure joy of Lionel Richie and the rest of them when he nailed it.
Yeah.
And there was still the self-doubt, Jack, because Quincy came in from the back from the soundboard and gave him a hug. And he said, oh, man, you nailed it. And Bob said something like, you really think so? You know, like it was still there. It's just the humanizing of it was, it's a really worthwhile thing, from Cyndi Lauper having to take off her Barbie earrings because they were making too much noise in the mic, to them all ordering fish sandwiches. It's just, and you having lived in LA, Lionel Richie was in Michael Jackson's house and the snake just came out from behind the couch. It's just, it couldn't have been, cue every possible LA thing circa 1984, 85. It was just fantastic. I think we're going to say goodbye on that note, Jack. So
all right.
Thank you. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in. The first timers, thank you for joining us. And we'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks, Seth.